Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Creamsicle Chronicle podcast. My name is JT Olson. Experiencing some technical difficulties for those of you watching on YouTube. Camera is not working, so it's just a logo today. But wanted to hop on here about 2 weeks out from the NFL draft and talk a little edge rusher rankings. Those of you check out bucksreport.com may know my edge rusher rankings dropped today. And this is a really interesting class of edge rushers. It's a group that lacks elite talent at the top. I mean, I think a Ruben Bain type is an elite talent. He dominated college football last year, outstanding player, but he does have limitations. He has short arms. He's not super athletic in space. He's a traditional hand in the dirt edge rusher, a defensive end. And that's great. That's perfect for teams who are looking for that kind of player. But that is kind of a weird fit for what the Bucs want to do. Run more of an odd front scheme. They do more stand-up rush linebackers than hand-in-the-dirt defensive ends. So really, if you take Ruben Bain out, if your arm length doesn't bother you, there isn't any other elite edge rushing options in this draft. So it comes down to just a matter of pick your flavor. What are the Bucs going to ask their defensive ends, their edge rushers to do? And one thing we want someone who will complement Yaya Diaby. He's the other edge on this team. He's a great number 2 edge, a fringe number 1. So someone who's going to complement his skill set, even if that's not a true number 1. If you have no A's, but you have 2 B pluses or B's, that's still a lot better than where they're at right now. So I want someone who's going to complement Diaby's power. He's a run through your face kind of power player. He's 6'3", 270. So, while I'm not against having another copy of that and getting a power rusher, really, I kind of like my edge group a little bit like a basketball team. You got different body types. You got different skill sets. You got your big man who can buffalo his way into the paint. And then you got your shooting guard who can slash and gets to the rim with speed. So that's kind of the prototype I think the Bucs should be looking for in this cycle. And my number 2 edge in the class happens to fit that mold, and that's Cassius Howell. Cassius Howell, edge rusher from Texas A&M. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. I think he had 11.5 sacks. Dude's a good pass rusher, a very good pass rusher. He's fast, he's quick, he's explosive, he's twitchy. He can bend around the edge. Really, he is that speed rusher that this Buccaneers roster needs. And I think he's more than that. He's not just a speed rusher. He's also someone who can counter with power. He can collapse the pocket. Anyone who watched the college football playoffs when Cassius Howell went up against Miami and their projected top 10 offensive tackle, CeCe Mauigoa, Howell pushed him into the pocket. He collapsed that pocket and really just ran through Mauigoa's face to move the quarterback off his spot. So Howell is a smaller mold. He's a speed rusher, but he also has a power element to his game, which I think is really important. I think it's never good to be super one-dimensional. You don't want to be all speed or all power. You have to keep offensive linemen guessing. You have to keep them on their toes, or in this case, on their heels. So, yes, his number 1 thing, it's quickness, it's speed, it's bending around the edge. But he's someone who can cut inside, he can counter, he can use power elements. So I really like what Cassius Howell brings to the table, and I think he's a great fit for this defense. Something I think doesn't get talked about very much. He's also really good in coverage for his position. And Texas A&M dropped him into coverage regularly, and he looked really good. Someone who can run with the wheel route, someone who can make plays in the flats, get his hand on the ball. And in a Todd Bowles defense, that matters. That's a big part of what Bowles likes to do. He likes to simulate pressures, give a lot of looks. This guy's coming, this guy's not coming. Don't know who it's going to be. Drop a defensive end into coverage. Got to be able to do it. Cassius Howell can do that. So if you're looking for a skill set fit, I think he's a great fit. If you're looking for high-end pass rusher, I think he's a fairly high-end pass rusher. I don't know if he's ever going to be an elite type. I don't project him to be Aiden Hutchinson or, Myles Garrett, anyone like that, TJ Watt. But I think this is going to be a really nice addition to whoever gets him, and I want it to be the Bucs. I think he's my ideal pick at 15. Now, in a perfect world, they can trade back a little bit and get that guy. Because, again, I don't think he's an elite talent. But if you're forced to stick and pick, there aren't many players who I'd rather have over him who I would expect to be there, if any. So that's my number 2 edge in the class. Then I also like a guy who is widely regarded as someone who's better, but I don't like better. And that's David Bailey out of Texas Tech. Bailey's another speed rusher. He'd be a really good fit in the system. He wins around the edge, although he's not as bendy as Howell. I think he's a little bit of a better run defender, although I don't think either of them are good run defenders necessarily. But here's my thing with Bailey. He doesn't have the power element that Howell has. And at the end of the day, this is a violent game. You have to have some physicality. You have to have some nasty to you. I think Howell has some of that. He has some edge, where Bailey doesn't. I think Bailey's kind of a soft player. And that's okay because he's an effective player. But I would prefer a player who has more of that in his game. So I knock him a little bit for that. I also just think this is someone who's not going to be on the Buccaneers' radar. Bailey has had some off-the-field stuff. He got suspended, I think, for a half. He got thrown out of the game for stopping on a player's head. Okay, can't do that. That's not good, but that's within the lines. You can play with an edge. It's a dirty play, but it's not something I think is disqualifying. He's also had an off-the-field fight with a cameraman after a game. So cameraman was taking pictures. Bailey didn't like the pictures he was taking, maybe cast him in a negative light. I had a physical altercation with the cameraman. That's not acceptable. And I don't think there's anyone who would argue that it is. You can bring some nasty, you can go over the line as long as it's between the lines and the confines of the game. But if you're attacking media people, cameramen, reporters, cheerleaders, fans, can't do it. Even players after the game can't do it. And I think this is going to be one of those character concerns that the Bucs flag. Not that I expect him to be there. He'll very likely be a top 5 pick. But even if it was available at 15, I don't think he's the best option. I don't think he's the best player. I don't think he's the right fit. Not for what the Bucs look for. So that's my number 3 guy. Not someone I would expect to see in Tampa, but someone worth mentioning because he is a skill set fit. My next rusher, number 4, is another guy who I really like in Tampa, and that's Central Florida's Malachi Lawrence. Lawrence, excellent athlete. Size, speed, burst. Really, physically, he is the package you are looking for as an edge rusher. I've seen very few players go from 0 to 60 as quickly as Lawrence does at this position. I think he is a good pass rusher. I think he has potential to be a great pass rusher. He could clean up his game, some coaching things, some technique things, winning more consistently with his hands, having a pass rush plan. I think that's something that can be fine-tuned, and with a good coaching staff, I would expect him to continue to ascend at the next level. I like the idea of him being that guy because, one, he fills the need. He is the pass rush edge you are looking for, someone who can win one-on-one. He's also someone who has a high ceiling. I think I heard John Ledyard yesterday compare him to a Danielle Hunter coming out of college. And I don't know if I see him as a Danielle Hunter, but I do see him as someone whose best football is still ahead of him. I think Central Florida used him in a variety of ways. They used him further in on the line of scrimmage sometimes that I would have liked, kind of like a 3-tech defensive tackle, because he has the physical skill set to moonlight there a little bit. But I think they really did too much with him. I think when he was at his best, he was a stand-up edge rusher, rushing the passer, and in those times, he looked really, really good, and I wish they would have done more of that with him. In the NFL, I would expect that to be more his primary role. So I really think if you focus in on what you want him to do, and you don't really overuse him because he's the most talented guy on your team, don't use him as a defensive tackle. Don't use him in a bunch of weird roles that don't suit what he's best at. If an NFL team can do that, I think he's going to be a double-digit sack kind of guy in the next level. So is it too rich for 15? In my book, yes. If they trade back into the mid to late 20s, is that a player who I think would be a really good match there? Yeah, I'd be really comfortable with that value, because I think that's kind of where the edge rushers lie in this class on my big board. Kind of late teens, mid 20s, going into the second round. That's where this group all starts. Howell, probably in the late teens, early 20s. Bailey in the mid 20s. These guys, that's kind of where they fall overall for me. It's not a top tier group. All of these guys are flawed. But if you put them in the right situation, you can maximize them. And that's what I think the Bucs need to look to do. A couple of more that I think suit the Bucs really well. One is Gabe Akis out of Illinois. I don't think this is the compliment I want across from Yaya Diaby. I think this is Yaya Diaby. Big linebacker. 6'2", 6'3", measured in at 261 at the combine, I believe. I think he played heavier than that. I think this guy is someone who's closer to 265, 270. But he's a linebacker. He's an outside linebacker. He's not that hand in the dirt player. He has that agility. He has that flexibility. He can do the things you want him to do as an outside linebacker in this system. But this is a power player. He's got a good get off the line of scrimmage. He will run through your face. He has a wrestling background. He's comfortable grappling with opponents. I wish he was a little more refined with his pass rush plan. I think if he's not winning with physicality, just that speed to power element, then I think he can be slowed down. And I think he'll see more of that in the NFL. But in terms of character, in terms of physical skill set, this is someone I like a lot. I think he'd be a great fit on the field. I think he's a great culture fit. This is the kind of person that Todd Bowles, Jason Light will really like. He's a very mature dude. He was a captain at Illinois. I think he would really be a good addition to Tampa. He's just not my ideal prototype with what they already have in-house. Now, don't get me wrong. I would not be mad at all if they had two Yaya Diabys. That would be great. I would love to have two Yaya Diabys. And I think that's what you could have in Akis. But like I said, I want a little more variance there. I want a little bit more of a fastball and a changeup there. Another player who I like is Texas Tech's Romello Height. Now we talk about David Bailey as the star edge rusher there, and rightfully so. He's the better player. But Romello Height on the other side of him was really good. He is someone, he's lean, but he's fast, he's agile, he can bend around the edge, and he can counter inside. He can drop into coverage similar to Cassius Howell, so I think he is a really natural fit for what they're looking for. I just think he's a designated pass rusher. Don't have him out there majority of the time. Ideally, he's a rotational piece, but I would love him as a rotational piece in this defense. If they, for some reason, choose to wait till the third round or so to draft an edge rusher, this is the guy I'd want them to target. He's a little bit older. He's 25, but that's okay. You're getting him later in the draft as a mid-round pick. Maximize what he is. Speed, quickness, outside, counters inside. He can do all that. Just get him in a niche role and let him thrive, because the Bucs really need that pass rush niche. So for me, those are the top 7. Those are the guys who I think are all natural fits with the Bucs. Another guy who I think is a fit, who's a little bit down my rankings, number 10, that's R. Mason Thomas from Oklahoma. I think he's similar to Romello Height. I think ideally he's a designated pass rusher, but he has some speed to power to his game. He is a speed rusher around the edge. He's pretty twitchy, and I do like that he can mix in some power elements. Now, those power elements are more of a pass rusher. They are not really transferring to his run defense. but he gives a good effort. He tries. And I got to give him credit for that, because the mindset on wanting to defend the run is almost as important, if not more important, than the physical aspect. So he's feisty. He'll give it his all. He's a smaller dude. He's a finesse player who has some power elements, but this is not someone who's going to body up with bigger guys. He wants to run around guys, and then when he gets them on their heels, that's when he's going to run through them. That's fine. There's definitely a place for that. It's just a little bit down my board. I don't think he's great with his hands. I think in terms of refining his technique and hand fighting, learning those pass rush moves, I think he could do a little bit more there. But I think he'd be a really good fit with what they're looking for. Round 2, round 3, get that designated pass rusher, let him win with speed, let him counter with power. I think he's a good fit. One guy who I do not think is a really great natural fit, and is someone I've been seeing mocked to the Bucks a lot. That's Akeem Mesidor out of Miami. Now, in a vacuum, I like Mesidor. He's my 7th ranked edge rusher. He is a well-rounded player. He's powerful. He can defend the run. Super productive at Miami, 12.5 sacks, 17.5 tackle for loss. But I don't know if he's an ideal fit. Much like Bain, ideally he's a hand-in-the-dirt defensive end. Bigger body, less flexible, less fluid. You don't really want him as that outside rush linebacker. And part of that is he doesn't really win around the corner. He kind of makes his living crossing the tackle's face and working towards the inside, which I think is fine. In the right system, I think there's definitely a place for that, and I think he will thrive in the right environment. But if you're looking for someone to bend the arc, to win up the field and get around players, I don't really think that's his game. You add into that, this is a 25-year-old rookie who is projected to go earlier than I would be comfortable taking him. And he's someone who's had a history of injuries. That kind of leads me away from him. I think if he's going in the top 50 picks, I don't know if that's ideal value, even though I like the player. But when you consider the fit, the age, the injury history, I just don't necessarily like the player for Tampa Bay. So that's one name who I would steer a little bit clear of. I'm not against him in the 2nd or 3rd round, because I do like him as a general value, as a general player. Just overall, I don't know if this is the right fit. 2 more like that are TJ Parker and Zion Young. 2 more guys who are kind of hand-in-the-dirt players. They're physical power players. They're not that outside linebacker type. I don't like either one necessarily in Tampa. And the Bucks have met with both of them. I believe they met with Parker at the Combine. I know they've hosted Zion Young on a top 30 visit, which I think that's just due diligence. I know Jason Light, he has said he will bring players in for a 30 visit when they're trying to do a character check. And that's part of their process of taking a guy off their board who they like. So Zion Young, he's had some stuff off the field. He got in a fight in the tunnel after a game. He got suspended. A couple of players on Michigan State jumped some Michigan players after a game. So there was some stuff there. He also got I think it was a DWI or DUI recently, I think in January. So this is someone who definitely has, at best, maturity issues, and at worst is a character problem. So I don't like the fit. I don't think he's a natural player in this defense. I don't think he's a culture fit. So I think the Bucks will definitely steer away from him. And where TJ Parker, I don't think is a character fit problem. I just think he's a skill set problem. He's a big body. I don't think he's going to do what the Bucks are going to ask him to do very well. So those are 2 guys who round out my top 10. Parker number 8, Young number 9. I just don't see them as a fit in Tampa. Just a couple names I mentioned in my article. Nadame Tucker from Western Michigan. Bucks met with him at the Combine. I believe they're hosting him on a top 30 visit. He's a weird one because his tape is really good. I really enjoyed watching him at Western Michigan this year. But before that, he did basically nothing in college football. He could barely get on the field at Houston before transferring, and he's a 25-year-old. He was literally a man amongst boys in the MAC. And that's a lower level of competition versus people who you're 5 years older than. You're supposed to dominate if you're any kind of talent. But, I mean, he also did well at the Senior Bowl. He impressed against the best seniors that were out there. So this is a player I like, but what do you do with a guy who's 25 and is a one-year wonder? I mean, I wouldn't draft him until day 3. And if you're in round 5-ish and he's on the board, I would absolutely take him because his tape is good. It's a hard evaluation knowing how unproductive he was before this year. One more I want to mention, Derek Moore out of Michigan. This dude is super well-rounded. He does everything well. He can play with power. He can play with bend. He was kind of that role player at Michigan during their championship run. He is kind of always been a steady presence. He broke out a little bit more this year. But he's one of those guys, I think he's good, but not great at anything. And that's okay. If you're looking for a rotational piece, like a third edge, I would love to have Derek Moore. I think he's a valuable player. But I don't think the Bucs are necessarily in need of a third edge. They need a top 1 or 2 edge, someone who can be a starter for them, someone who can be more of an impact player. And while I like Moore, I don't necessarily love what Moore does on the field. So I really think if they get to that point in the draft and they haven't drafted an edge, they've made a mistake. They need to address this position early, first or second round. If at the worst case scenario, third round, because if you're going BPA in the first, you get a linebacker in the second. If that's the path you go, I can live with it. But ideally, this is your first round target, whether that's Howell, whether that's Malachi Lawrence. Trade back and get one of those guys. That would be my ideal pathway. But they got options. This is a deep class with a lot of players who I think suit their needs, with a lot of players who I think will suit the culture that they're trying to build, with the exception of David Bailey. Those top 7 to 6 or so guys I mentioned, that's Cassius Howell, Malachi Lawrence, Gabe Akis, Romello Height. Like all of them. R. Mason Thomas, another one. Any of those guys I think would be a really good addition and fill the need they're looking for. Obviously, the higher up on that list they go, I think the better off they are. Getting a Malachi Lawrence, getting a Cassius Howell. That's the way. If I were running it, if I were Jason Light, that would be my game plan. But we'll see. This isn't a very strong draft. I don't know how many teams will be looking to trade up to allow the Bucs to move back. So, I mean, in order to do it, you have to have a dance partner. And there just aren't that many players worth trading up for in this class. Now, we'll see how it goes. Sometimes good players slide. Sometimes unexpected things happen. Maybe if there's a tackle that a team really likes and they want to move up for it, the Bucs can take advantage of that. If a team is trying to get ahead of the Jets to draft Ty Simpson, they feel like that's the way that they're going to go, the Bucs could take advantage of that. Now, they're in a good position to trade back based on what players I think will be available, but none of these guys I project to be stars. Caden Proctor, Ty Simpson, these are all players who I have questions with. And I don't know if I were a GM, I'd want to trade up to try and get a talent like that. So that could limit the Bucs' ability to trade, and it could limit the value they get in return. But we'll see. Maybe a guy like Fano is on the board, and someone wants to move up to get him, get ahead of Detroit at 17. Maybe somehow a CC Mauno is there, and a team wants to move up to get him. Maybe a team like the Chargers or the Steelers, they want to move up to get Vega Ione, the guard out of Penn State. Really good player. That is something the Bucs might be able to take advantage of, but again, this is not a great class, and I think that is going to limit the amount of teams who are looking to trade up in it. But that's all for now. Wanted to come on, discuss my edge rank, because this is a big need for the Bucs. This is a position that we have to talk about. We have to look closely at, and I think they will. I think they're in the process of doing that. They met with a lot of edge rushers at the Combine. They've brought several in on top 30 visits. Obviously, Jason Light and Todd Bowles know that this is a need. The only thing we need to find out is how they're going to address it. but we know that they will address it. And ideally, it's going to be one of these players I talked about. So that's it for me. You can follow me on Twitter at IcewaterOlson. Find all of my written work at bucksreport.com. And until next time, go Bucks.